Well, good morning and welcome to our panel. I want to introduce I'll tell you up front that all these folks here, these four people, are incredibly, when you have their CVs, but I need to say that I've known all of them, with the exception of Meg, but I feel like I've known her for 10 years. But David and Chauncey and Brandon and I go way back. And when I was asked by Erica to think about moderating this panel, and of course Jeremy recommended me, and so I couldn't say no. But more importantly, when I heard the panelists were, I decided that this would be something to do, and for the reasons that the fact that we've been steeped in these issues for decades, working together in one way or another, in policing, but also in other ways, focused on this city and trying to bring change about. So I'm really pleased to be able to be in their company. They are stellar folks with deep experience, and you'll see that as we begin the discussion. So let me introduce Meg, Reiss, and Chauncey Parker and David Kennedy and Brandon Del Pozo. But before we get to the discussion, I wanted to ask them if they had maybe a short, make some comments about and observations about, give you a hint about what we're going to talk about in this panel, if you care to. If not, we'll move forward.
David Kennedy, we're completely blind up here. Is anybody out there?
Yeah.
So I am criminal justice faculty here at John Jay, and I run a applied violence prevention shop called the National Network for Safe Communities. And I am, and the NNSC is a collection of public safety and violence prevention obsessives.
Meg?
Hi, good morning. I'm Meg Reiss, and I'm the Chief Assistant at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. And I have, over the course, as far back as these reports go, over that course of time, I've both started my career as a line prosecutor in Brooklyn, but have been in and out of government, public, private. So have an opportunity, and also sort of public adjacent, and doing police monitorships, the Los Angeles Police Department monitorship. Had the opportunity to work with David doing violence reduction. So I take into this current role trying to bring all of those perspectives and try to do implementation to reflect what we think best achieves public safety.
And I'm Chauncey Parker. I'm almost 40 years serving in criminal justice. Recently was the deputy mayor for public safety. Currently the director of the New York, New Jersey HIDTA, which is a program I've been involved in. It's a federal grant for over 30 years. I've been the director of that program. But what that grant does is it invests in partnerships and law enforcement partnerships to build safe and healthy communities. And that's currently what I'm focused on.
So good morning, everybody. My name is Brandon Del Pozo. I'm an assistant professor of medicine and health policy at Brown University. I got there in a circuitous path. I started after college, a New York City police officer in 1997, started on patrol in East Flatbush, went on to command the 6th Precinct and the 50th Precinct, did a bunch of really other interesting stuff there in New York, and then I was the chief of police of Burlington, Vermont for 4 years. That experience turned me toward understanding the need to pursue public health as well as public safety, that if you're pursuing one but not the other, you're not walking and chewing gum at the same time, and citizens are going to lose out on what the government owes them in terms of a safe, healthy community. But one shout out, I was in graduate school for 21 years straight, from 1999 to 2020. Yeah, it ended well, but my first experience in graduate school was here at John Jay. This theater didn't exist, this building didn't exist, it was the old campus, and I'm always so thrilled to be back here. sitting in a theater that didn't exist in '99, back in my alma mater. So thanks for having me here.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. So, after hearing Jeremy speak yesterday, I was reflecting on his comments, reminding us how critically important it is for this convening to think about not just what we want to accomplish going forward, but to think about looking back, and that looking back get up to speed and understand the history of some of the challenges for policing and our criminal justice system in this city. And so I thought, I want to share something with you. I'm going to read this because I think Jeremy's got it right. Even as we chart, a safe path forward, looking back can be extremely helpful. So let me just share this with you, and then I'll tell you a little bit about it. The history of crime reduction and prevention has been on the social, political, and economic agenda of modern America for more than a century. In the final quarter of the 20th century, a new cadre of well-educated, forward-thinking police leaders implemented innovative approaches to crime and other problems affecting quality of life in communities across the country, and certainly here in New York City, sparking a revolution of sorts in policing strategy, witnessing record-sustained reductions in serious crime and significant progress toward sustained reductions in serious crime and significant reinventing our police departments in ways through a groundswell of innovation centered on community policing theory. True progress, however, is in the eye of the beholder, and in many instances, in my minority communities in particular, would question just how far we've come. Allegations of racial profiling, perjury by police officers, other patterns and practices suggestive of police misconduct reveal the grim reality that our society remains in crisis with respect to police-community relations, threatening to undermine progressive strides, the progressive strides we've made. The problem has been especially acute in the relationship between police and the African American community, and more recently has manifested itself between police and the Hispanic community. A poll commissioned by the City Council, New York City City Council, found that while residents unequivocally appreciated the department's efforts in rolling back crime, at the same time, they are suspicious of its overly aggressive tactics, the lack of commitment to holding brutal or corrupt officers accountable as well. The poll also found that by most any measure, people of color feel a lack of trust in and respect for police, as well as a high level of fear of police. So this is an introduction to an article I submitted to the Fordham Urban Law Journal back in 2000. And after listening to Jeremy's comments, I thought I'd share this with you because I think you should get the point that so much of what we're talking about today, if I didn't tell you the date that this was written, it could well have been written today about the discussions that we've been having and as part of this convening. So rather than run through the data, I think you all now have a good handle on what was working well and the numbers that were down versus some of the other challenges that have become fodder for this discussion and these conversations, which will help us chart the way forward. So thank you for that. So with that, let's move into our discussions on the data. So in terms of explaining New York City's public safety, successes, public safety successes. Thank you. I want to begin by having a conversation and asking our team here to react to what we've done well, and in their various roles, there are lots of activities, and we'll run through some of those as we talking about some of those activities as we go through the morning. So I'd like to talk about the issue of violence in particular, and addressing that and how we dealt with violent crime, and what are the approaches that the police and prosecutors in particular are doing and trying to implement as a result of the challenges that we know exist around crime. I'll start with the prosecutor. I'll start with Meg, maybe.
So, I feel like David should start first because it all starts with, over this period of time, a big body of the work was focused deterrence, was the work that David Kennedy did of identifying who the drivers of violence were and making it known to us that it is a small percentage of people that make up that group that are actually driving violence, and that's where our attention should be focused. And so I should say internally within the office, that is what we do. We focus on, for, of course, homicides and shootings, but I think one of the things that might be particularly unique to our office is the amount of effort we focus on shots fired cases, because we know those are arguably it's just a matter of somebody having bad luck or good luck that somebody isn't hit. So we treat all of those cases the way that we would treat a homicide case, the way that we partner with the police department, because the same way we would partner with NYPD on a homicide, we do that of pulling video and really trying to address those cases. We know from a whole body of research that in this category of cases, enforcement is really the #1 deterrent. So I'm going to leave the rest of that conversation to David because that is the body of his work. But I would say, as we've heard all yesterday, and what we know is that is a small part of the equation. That's a small part of the people that are coming to our office. And the broader category of people are people that need to get reconnected to resources. And so the infrastructure that has been set up in our office, from actually beginning in community with community-based navigators that are funded by our office to prevent people from coming into the system, all the way through and trying to facilitate those that are charged with both statutory and other types of violence that don't involve gun violence, that those people are also afforded opportunities, if appropriate, and can be stabilized in community to get those opportunities. And now, if I can pass it to David, because I think these two complement.
So I'm not going to do that. So I want to step way further back. So my very good friend Ben asked the question, let's talk about what we are good at, what has worked. And I think there's an even larger kind of chapter heading here, which is to note that something did work. So I find myself talking with my students and people younger than myself, which now includes nearly everybody, about what New York City used to be like. Because if you weren't here and you didn't experience it, people can't imagine what that was like. So in the early 1990s, this city had over 2,200 homicide victims in a single year. The subway was a wasteland. The first time I walked down from Penn Station and got on a subway platform, the Train pulled in, you couldn't see any of the train or any of the windows. It was completely covered by graffiti. And the doors opened, and in one of those predictable, stupid human tricks, the people on the train, people on the platform forced their way onto the train, so the people on the train couldn't get off, and everybody locked up. And my first introduction to the subway system in New York City was two big strapping white guys got into a fist fight right there in the doorway of the train. And that kind of thing was completely normal in New York City at that time. People had given up on New York City. And before the pandemic led to the spike that it did lead to, New York City, with an even larger population of about 8.5 million people, had, I believe, under 300 homicides in the best year before things momentarily got worse. That is an unbelievable success story. And the point I want to make here is that was driven by the policy and discretionary decisions of the people who run this place. It was not driven by the federal government. It was not a consent decree from the Justice Department. I'm embarrassed to say that it did not come from places like this. The Academy did not prescribe the policies and supply the research on the understandings that did that. People talk about the public health approach to violence prevention. That did not come from the American Medical Association. Everything that has gone into what is, in fact, a revolution in public safety and violence prevention came from the innovation and commitment of relatively low-level actors at the city and agency and community levels. So Erin Dalton, my old friend, was sitting here in the last panel, and one of the last things that she said was, I really think we have to credit the importance of will. And key actors at key moments in this city said, we are going to figure this out. We are going to make things better. And they proved that, in fact, they could do that. And within that portfolio are countless innovations, right, of the kind that Meg just named. We could talk for the rest of the day about the strategic and tactical moves that have produced those outcomes. But the point I want to make here is that those transformations were driven primarily by particular people who were elected to mayor and to the borough prosecutor's offices, and by the choices that particularly mayors made about, first and foremost, who was going to be the commissioner of the New York Police Department and what their policies were going to end up being. And starting in the de Blasio era with the commitment to building up the non-law enforcement infrastructure and institution around violence prevention in New York City, which have made it one of the safest cities in the world consistently. Within that, we have had wild swings in the use of the enforcement authority, particularly of the New York Police Department. So if you look at the crime trajectory, it is very consistently down and down and down and down. The expenditure of public authority has been very different. I consider the stop, question, and frisk era a blight on this city. It was a misuse of police powers and a misuse of the authority vested in these institutions. So I think there's a headline here that we ought to be very clear about, which is we should absolutely expect our elected and appointed officials to do well in this area because the city has proved that that's possible. And as Chico said, that is not the case in places like Chicago. And since we know that we can do this now, we should expect people to do it and to do it well. And we should expect them to do it in a way that absolutely economizes on the use of the expression of public authority. because we know, as a matter of fact, that we can do this really, really, really well with ever decreasing amounts of actual enforcement.
Thank you for that, David. Stop and frisk was one of those moments in the history of the department that, as you say, was an abomination. And I came back to the department when Bratton became PC. I left what I was doing in Washington to come back because Bratton was going to be PC, and it made perfect sense. And I think I would just say at this juncture, I won't go into details, but I think the progress that we made in that 7 years, 2014 through 21, what was, I mean, unprecedented in the history of the department. And crime, and the data proves that, shows it. So, but I just want to just share with the audience, and you folks know this already, but when it came to stop and frisk, it wasn't just the citizens. I mean, those numbers in 2011 at approaching 700,000 stops, and it was 12 years of this going on, so the numbers was astonishing. And who the victims of those stops were people of color, young men of color primarily, Hispanic, Black, so forth, all those things. So you know the history. But the other people who the policy and the practice really had an impact on were 11,000 officers who graduated from the police academy as they were coming out of the academy, were sent to those assignments in the so-called impact zones with no support, no field training. And so in a sense, they became police officers to do good, but they ended up standing on street corners in the various impact zones, issuing, stop making stops, doing stops, and really were left to their own devices. And when I say that, the people in the communities were not really in the commands, the sergeants and so forth, in the precincts where they were assigned, gave them no assistance. So in effect, those folks became victims of that abomination as well. So I just as an aside, because I don't think most people even are aware of that, and I wasn't until I came back and to the job. Chauncey.
So I think I was just thinking, David, as you were talking, I think that the 90s really was a tipping point in police. It was a paradigm shift in public safety. And I think I think up until, and I think for two reasons, but I think up until that point, at least my perspective was crime was something really out of control. It was kind of like the weather. You prepare for it. If there's you do whatever you're going to do, but it wasn't like something you could actually do something about crime. And there are two things that happened in the 90s that really shifted that paradigm. One was CompStat, and that was this dramatic, and the Commissioner Bratton and his leadership, but 20% reduction of crime year after year, was setting up really a police department that's optimistic to say, no, actually we can reduce crime. That was one thing. And secondly, I think, David, what you did in Boston, where you began your work, was to say there's nothing inevitable about people being involved in crime. Don't say that it's inevitable, because there are things that it's a rational thought. In most circumstances, it's a rational thought, and there are strategies that can impact whether somebody commits a crime or doesn't commit a crime, particularly a crime of violence. And I think those two things, CompStat and your work, really changed the paradigm 180 degrees, because now where we are, we have ups and downs, but one thing for sure is there's the expectation of everybody in this city, and I think everybody in the country, don't tell me crime is like the weather and it's out of your control. You better come up with a strategy to figure out how you're going to make it better, and that I think is really exciting, because we're set on that. We're not set to be pessimists ever again that we can't fix it. We have challenges, and people can be upset about this law or that law or this cut in funding or whatever it may be. But it is an optimistic, relentless, optimistic view that we can do. We can make people safer. I think the one thing I just take a moment to say, like as an example of sort of what came out of that, is a project that I've been involved in, which started with a blank sheet of paper. Was the Manhattan DA was one of the cornerstone partners of this. but it is to say, well, if the North Star, we've set, what is it relates to gun violence, we've set the North Star in this city and other cities, is that nobody gets shot. That's what the goal is. And that's the work of Comstat, that's the work of David Kennedy. To say that it can't be done, don't tell me it can't be done, because we know it can be done and has been done, and we have to continue to do it. So if what we're going to do, and this is 4 years ago, when gun violence had really spiked in New York City for a variety of reasons, but it did. How do we reduce that gun violence? We weren't going to say it's out of control like the weather. How are we going to reduce that? One strategy is that what we know as we analyze it is that there's a very small number of people who drive the gun violence in New York City. And they're repeatedly getting arrested for gun violent crimes. And because we're a big city and because we have 25 different law enforcement agencies all working kind of in different silos, we can sometimes miss opportunities to be as strong as we can in our response to when somebody is arrested for gun violence. So it's an experiment with the Manhattan DAs, with the police department, really with all different federal, state, and local law enforcement 4 years ago. We said, well, let's meet every morning and review the people who are arrested in New York City for a gun violent felony. They've just been arrested in the last 2 hours, 5 hours, and compare notes and try to build the strongest case for arraignment. And there's not a grant that pays for it. It was just a common North Star that we think that by working together, we can focus on these, what we call trigger pullers. It's like 2 people a day, 3 people a day in a city of 9 million, but they are the ones causing responsible for the gun violence. Today is the 900th meeting in a row that team has met. Every single morning at 10 o'clock, that team of 25 different agencies, all 5 DAs, the United States Attorney, city jails, state prisons, probation, federal probation, city probation, everybody comes to that meeting at 10 o'clock every single morning. Today's the 900th day in a row. And I think that is the natural extension of the optimism that was created by Comstat and your work, David, that you said, when you really flipped the paradigm and said, get to work, because there's nothing inevitable about this gun violence. Together and with innovation and data and strategies, we can keep people safer.
And just to follow up, and I'll grab you, Brandon. But Chauncey's a modest individual, but I'm telling you that what he just described wouldn't have happened with just anyone, because of his reputation and because of his commitment. You know, he used the word North Star. I mean, that's his thing. Chauncey's one of these people who thinks that way, and so this happened, and because of Chauncey, but it happened, and 900 days. You know, I don't know that you know of any sort of collaboration that comes together and to deal with a crisis, and that crisis is gun violence, and then it somehow turns into people who are committed. They throw in and they show up from multiple agencies to focus like a laser on this small group of violent criminals to get it done. So, I just that's how this happens. It's about leadership and vision and being transformative in how we manage these crises. Really makes a difference. And it's a formula for not just law enforcement or public safety, but I think it's the kind of thing that you want to have happen in your organization, that people have bought in and are willing to do and put in the time. Brandon.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to echo what David said, which was, how bad it was in the 90s is what set the course of my career. I never intended to be a police officer, but when I grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, my mother was a homemaker, my father was an immigrant, and no one in my family had gone to college. And so when I got into Stuyvesant High School, which was then on the Lower East Side, it was this obviously great public school that was a pathway to college. And but it wasn't just a no-brainer to go. You had to decide if you were going to take the train every day to Stuyvesant in 1988, was it worth the risk? And that wasn't a trivial question. That wasn't a moral panic question. That was an actual, genuine question that could have consequences. I have a friend whose parents decided that it was not worth it for him to take the risk. He went to the local high school, and we will never know what trajectory that diminished for him. By freshman year, I was in one of the transit districts looking at mugshots of people who robbed me on the train. I saw a kid get stabbed in the back on the way home from school. a friend of mine, a classmate of mine at Stuyvesant, was killed by a stray bullet after school, and one of my teachers was beaten into a coma walking to Union Square. So when I applied to college, I ended up going to college in rural New Hampshire, not because I'd ever been there, not because I had any desire to go to college in the woods. I just said, this must be a place where I won't be in danger going to college, right? But while I was there up at Dartmouth, I was hearing the news from New York City about all that was going on with crime fighting. I was hearing about crime going down. I was hearing about this sort of relentlessness to this can-do idea. And as a young guy who didn't want a desk job, I was really excited by that. And I came home, and 2 days after graduating, I took the NYPD test, worked as a paralegal in Kings County DA, waiting to get hired, got hired, and the rest is history. But I just want to go back to that to attest that there was this shift in our thinking that was exciting. That you didn't escape from New York City. You can go back and reclaim it, right? But then as a precinct commander, as a street cop who became a precinct commander, I began to see that the tactics that yielded a lot of early gains yielded those gains because they were coarse, but they were effective. If you were around in the 80s, you knew I used to, when I was home, go up to the bar scene on the Upper West Side. You had to drive up, forget which one, 9th Avenue's northbound, 10th Avenue. But you went through a gauntlet of prostitutes and pimps and drug dealers that would stop you with the red lights. It was the gay prostitutes, then the transvestite, transgender prostitutes, then the straight, until you got to about 30th Street, and then it stopped. And then one day, there was a cop on every corner from sundown to sunup, and that was gone. And the cops were there every day from sunup to sundown. And I said, my God, if it was that simple, why didn't we just do it earlier? Now, granted, they moved the sex work indoors, but it was not there as a blight on the street. And before you know it, Martha Stewart had her headquarters in the buildings that used to be part of the stroll. I say that to say, when you have a lot of gains to be made, when there's a lot of rampant crimes, things like foot posts, things like going from virtually no stop and frisks to a sensible amount of stops, pay big dividends. But by the time I was the commander of the 6th Precinct from 2011 to 2016, you were expected to contribute to what was then the running total of 680,000 stops a year. And I would ask my bosses, if crime is going down, why is the suspicion of crime going up? This just one doesn't follow the other. And there was a fear, if we stop doing this and crime goes up, we're going to look like we don't have it under control anymore. And we're going to look like we're not doing our job, and the precinct commanders won't get promoted, the mayor won't get reelected. But we were using foot posts, mass arrests, stop, question, and frisk, very coarse methods that, done in proportion, returned real dividends in 1992, 1993, 1994. In 2013, they were just exacting a huge toll on petty offenders and innocent people. And then where we are now, I had the opportunity, if you don't know about Vital City, you should take a look at Vital City. It's a journal of urban thought. It's a journal of what evidence-based policy approaches to living and thriving in New York. And they commissioned some colleagues and I to take a deep dive into crime, including subway crime. And what we found is number one, it's still much better than it was before. Back in the 90s. Number two, it is up in many respects from where it was even a few years ago, but it's a change, right? It's not the property-driven robberies and burglaries and car thefts. What's really bedeviling New York right now is stranger assaults, especially in the subways, driven by mental illness. And that is not an approach that's susceptible to 680,000 stop, question, and frisk a year. That's an approach that's not susceptible to throwing the book at people, prosecuting them, and locking it up. If we got away with being unsophisticated before, to solve the problem we're contending with now, which is unchecked mental illness on the streets that ends up in frightening cases on the subway of assault, et cetera, we have to be able to take a more nuanced approach, because strict enforcement's not going to solve it. Leveraging the police with behavioral health, with meaningful interventions, with things that reduce addiction, reduce homelessness, reduce mental illness, that will solve it. And it takes the type of thoughtfulness and nuance that, for example, David brought to focus deterrence and violence, and that the DA is bringing to the way it prosecutes cases. But to make the gains that we need to make to keep this thing going, we cannot just go back to the course approaches that may have worked for a few years in the 90s and that bedeviled us since then.
Brandon, don't put your mic down. Let's dig a little deeper into community concerns about disorder. let's sort of talk a bit more about that. I mean, it came up incidental to some of the comments that were made in terms of what we're doing about it, but there are various types of disorder, and so could you? I know you have a particular concern about police and how they use desk appearance tickets, but or whether they use them properly to handle those challenges. So can you have a perspective on how the city, how we should approach collective approach to low level enforcement?
I have a big idea about it. My my doctoral thesis was on what it means to police a democracy, and one of the things I hit on in there, it's a PhD in philosophy, so you can shake your head and wonder what that amounts to in life. But I was able to get a faculty position, so it worked out. The yes, you can be a professor if you get, maybe, I don't know. The point is that I have this PhD in philosophy. Here you go. But in it, I hit on that one of the things that's critical in a dense, diverse democracy like New York City is not so much the idea of order and disorder, which assumes there's like more a moral valence to it, which assumes there's like good and bad. Sometimes there is. But like the disorder of Times Square is not the disorder of Sheepshead Bay. The disorder of a Friday night is not the disorder of a Sunday morning. The disorder of the 4th of July or Labor Day or the parade down Eastern Parkway is not the disorder of a leafy street late at night. And what it really, really, really is about is the fair terms of social cooperation in our public spaces. And I'll illustrate it with 3 examples to just put the idea out there. I'll try to do it in a minimum of time, and then I wonder what my colleagues think. But when I was the precinct commander of the 6th Precinct, and we were on the verge of, at the state level, legalizing gay marriage, there was a march to let the Supreme Court know that New York was watching its decision and hoping for the best. And that march was taking place. It started basically at the Stonewall, where a protest against police oppression of gay rights started the modern gay rights movement in the U.S. And they didn't have a permit. They didn't have permission to march in the street, but I let them. I said, you know what? This is a historic moment. There's thousands of people watching this. There's hundreds of people marching. You don't have a permit to go and block traffic, but I'm not going to make you march single file on the sidewalk today for this historic event. I've decided it's safe. I'm the precinct commander. Have at it, right? So that was inconveniencing to some motorists, inconveniencing to some pedestrians, but it was what I thought at the time a very fair use of the space. A few weeks later, the 11th annual March for Vegetarianism was taking place, and they said, can we march in the street? I said, no, you have to march on the sidewalk or get a permit. And then a few months, not because I'm anti-vegetarian, but because in the context, that would be an unfair disruption of traffic given the total context of things. And then a few weeks after that, the state did legalize gay marriage, and it was chaos in front of the Stonewall Inn. They were breaking every law that was so carefully written to preserve order was broken that night. Public urination, public drinking, sound reproduction, blocking pedestrian traffic, blocking vehicular traffic, excessive noise, trespassing into parks late at night. But all good, because that was not an unfair, uncooperative use of the space. If that happened in 3 weeks from that time, we would be enforcing it. So those are 3 big illustrative examples. But go down to drinking, go down to drug use, go down to homelessness, to mental illness, to public vending. The question is not, are you a bad person because you sell stuff on the street without a license? Are you a bad person because you're having a beer in a place where you're not allowed to have beer? It's, are we providing fair, good, meaningful, sustained, equal access to precious public spaces in the right ways, in the right contexts? And if you're enforcing the law as simply as written, you're just enforcing it without understanding the spirit of the law, which is a law that allows the police and the government to broker and enforce the fair terms of social cooperation. And one of the things I hated doing as a cop was being expected, if a guy was sitting in front of his apartment on a Friday night, clearly got home from work, still dressed in construction clothes and drinking a beer, the idea that I could not drive by without giving that man a ticket was an anathema to me, because he didn't have a patio, he didn't have a balcony, that was where he was enjoying his beer. But if it was a kid at 11 a.m. playing hooky, having a beer in the lobby of that apartment building, which is a public space, I felt like I did have to give a ticket. That was a profoundly unfair use of the space. And as we look at solving the problems of disorder today, I would love us to understand that it really is about the fair use of public space and not about like a black and white conception of order and disorder that like is rigidly enforced by statute.
Thank you. We're getting running out of time, and so can we? We're going to wrap up, and so could each of you just Chauncey raised an issue, and we're doing one of our prep sessions about looking forward to the future, and what are some of the things that we value most, that we think are most necessary to do. In short, as brief as you can be, about things that we know. And some of it may exist already. This conversation brought some of those things out. How do we reinforce them? How do we keep them going? And are there steps that go beyond that may be new ideas, big ideas about what's possible? So I'll start at the end. Chauncey, start with you, Chauncey. And
Yeah,
then
sure.
go to-
So I think the most important thing is that we have to be optimists. And I don't mean that we have to be optimists as some starry-eyed vision of the world. I think we have to be optimists because the people that we serve depend on us being optimists. What we don't need is people telling us why things can't be done. Our job is to get things done and to make things better. And like Sisyphus, push the rock up the hill. If it falls down, we keep pushing, but we got to be optimists that we can do it. I think for me right now, what I look at, I've just been reading Jeremy Travis's book, Parsimony. And I think that if I think of the path forward, I think he has it absolutely right. And I know, David, you've talked about it. Mark Kleiman has talked about it over the years. I think it's absolutely right, this idea that there is a social contract. Like if we imagine that there's a social contract, and in this social contract, we do make rules. And the rules may be whether you can steal. The rules can be whether you can inject drugs in a public park, whatever those rules are. If we set this as a rule, could be, smoking marijuana is illegal, not smoking marijuana is not illegal. Whatever the rules are, but if we make it a rule, as I understand it really almost from the origins of criminal justice, is if the rule has a legitimate social purpose, which is we want to protect public spaces for people want to use a swing set and there's somebody on the swing set injecting drugs. So is there a legitimate social purpose to that rule? The most important thing is that the government, it doesn't have to be the police, the government, the state's responsibility is to enforce that rule with the lightest touch possible. I think too often it's call 911 and have somebody arrested because that's the only people who answer the call on a 911. They're always available, but we can be so much more creative at accomplishing it. But I do think that the rules have to be enforced. But I do think we have to just use our imagination, data, creativity, listen to each other, figure out a much more creative way to do it. Some of it can be done, fix the pothole, put up lights. Create after-school programs. Could be all sorts of things that we could do that's a lighter touch, but we do have to enforce the rules. And so that's something I think is key with the path forward.
Meg?
So I think we do know what the path forward is because we've done it before, but I think the most important thing is that community tells us what the path forward is, and it's investments in community, because what has to be restored is hope. And when we have over-policing, we have over-prosecution, and community has no trust in government, then obviously things deteriorate. And we really do, by investment in community and listening to community voices, that is what inspires and lets people know that there is a future and something to work for. And that's probably a different version of the optimism that you're talking about, Chauncey, but it is complementary of providing hope to people.
The cities have been the laboratories for what is in fact a transformation in how we understand and address public safety, right? So, Chauncey said something happened in the 90s that made these institutions understand that they could be effective. And that has happened at the city level. The federal government has played almost no role in this except to get in the way. New York City, so why am I optimistic, which I am? New York City is probably, with LA, the most innovative and consistently creative and effective city around these issues. And it right now has one of, if not the most sophisticated sort of criminal justice community, and one of, if not the most sophisticated community-based public safety and violence intervention structure, the crisis management system, which means it is poised to continue to innovate and to do better and to do better and to do better. And none of that has been linear. And it's not going to be linear. It's going to lurch around, and we're going to have bad moments and bad leadership, and we're going to make big mistakes. But we have gone from 2,200 plus to 300, and a hugely reduced, to Meg's point, footprint of the use of state authority in this area. And there's absolutely no reason we can't continue to do better.
Okay, I'm going to exercise some license and hold off on Brandon and do some questions. Do we have time for questions? We do. You have about 10 minutes, I think.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for all of your contributions to this conversation. It's been super interesting to hear you all. Chauncey, I wanted to chat about something that you were talking about. Totally understand why you're celebrating the 900 consecutive meetings. It does seem like those meetings are targeting people fairly downstream. So you're talking about a moment of arrest, and I'm wondering if you sort of know who these people are, what efforts you have been involved in or you have seen where the effort is more upstream, and trying to identify who those people are so they never actually end up in that ticker tape that you're looking at.
Yeah, that's such a great question, and it's on my mind because we've had so many different visitors. We had, the chancellor came, and the way I describe our meeting is, at this point, the house is on fire, and all we have is a fire extinguisher. Right? These are people who they've committed a gunpoint robbery. They just got arrested for a shooting. And so I do think part of our strategy is today, right now, what we have to do is to protect people. We have to have a response for people who are hurting people. We have to get them off the street. But what makes me so optimistic is if we can do this for this group, if you get 25 agencies for 900 days in a row coming to this particular, the power of working together without some kind of grant telling you get paid to be there or this or that. So what we're doing now, to answer your question, is called, we call it the Lifesaver Project, which is it's really the antithesis of this meeting, which is identifying people. We're starting in the Bronx, but identifying young people who are between the ages of 12 and 16 who've been arrested for a robbery or anything having to do with a gun. And with law enforcement plays whatever role law enforcement can be helpful, but it's with DYCD, it's with community organizations. How do we do everything we can not to get these young people to ever get to this table? We call it the Lifesaver Project because they're people that we know in criminal justice that if we do what we're doing right now, they will be dead or in prison by the time they're 21 years old. So this is really about saving lives. And so that we kind of a proof of concept that we can work together. Now let's apply it, I think, through the four corners of government. Let's apply it to young people so that we have effective interventions and exit ramps and alternatives. We could apply it to severely mentally ill people. We could apply it to all sorts of things, but it's all the power of what happens in government if we all systematically, what if we work together? There's nothing stronger than that partnership. And I think what we've done with this Gun Violence Strategies Partnership is prove that it's possible. Now let's just expand it to all the other challenges, and in particular, intervening much further upstream so that we never have to. Tom Ridges, who's one of our partners from the Staten Island DA's office, frames it. He says, my favorite meeting will be the meeting that the lieutenant says we have no one to talk about today. So that's our North Star. And the way to get there is by developing a similar parallel strategy with young people way earlier upstream so that we don't have to respond later.
Thank you all I'm in the middle here. Thank you all for your service as well as for sharing your perspectives today. NYPD has recently announced the launch of their quality of life initiative and QStat. To me, this feels like a bit of a reversal of some of these trends in talking about the role of the police on these issues, but it's clearly there's a lot of gray area in the conversation. So I'm interested in what you all see as sort of your high hopes for a program like that as led by the police, but also concerns that you might have about a program like that as led by the police.
I mean, I would just say my high hope for it is that I think that there are conditions, there's disorder, that people want to have a response. Based on the rules we've set up, they want to have a response. I don't know whether it has to be an NYPD response, but I think the success of that program and anything else that we're doing to enforce those rules will be based on what Jeremy writes about, which is figure out how to solve that problem with the least amount of force, the lightest touch possible. How do you actually solve that problem? And I think we've found through government, we've seen it, you studied around the world, I'm sure you too, David, that there are a lot of people who've been very creative at solving the problem without the heavy hand of the only answer is Rikers Island, a whole different course, but can you solve the problem that people are asking to be solved?
I can say that for people that are arrested based on those charges, we're using every opportunity to remove them from the system as soon as possible. So whether that is in pre-arraignment diversion, then they're removed before that they actually even get charged by our office and connected to resources immediately. For cases where often what we have seen is a lot of the cases people have warrants, so they have to go before a judge, but we have court-based navigators in arraignments, and people are connecting with court-based navigators, and our navigators are Fortune navigators who have, and one of the reasons they were chosen is because they have access to emergency housing. So that initiative started in August of 24, and already almost 80 people have been placed in housing just coming out of arraignments. And so at each iteration and stop, we have really off-ramps, the lightest touch possible. And we heard yesterday from all of the panelists, the goal is to reconnect people to necessary resources so they can stabilize and be safely in community. So we are using those opportunities to reconnect people at every possible chance.
It's interesting to see we had like what were called conditions units, which were quality of life units in every precinct. Then they were supplemented in some cases by impact zones where the cops were these rookies like scrubbing bubbles, writing every possible quality of life ticket, to disbanding the conditions units, getting rid of the impact zone, and we're going back to having quality of life units. So, a little bit of consistency would be welcome, because as Chauncey and I have often said to each other, like, what's tricky about quality of life is you have to correct it then and there, or it doesn't matter. Like, you can't have someone blaring their music all night and then a day later say, your music was really loud 2 nights ago, that was bad. Like, that was in fact a miserable night, and the damage to the people around you in a dense city was done. So you have the police out there, a force of above 30,000 officers with a dispatch system, a records management system, a transportation system empowered by the law that can address these issues. But then, once the police turn their attention to the person, what happens to them when it comes to prosecution or intervention does matter. Like, so we have this effective front end that can respond, that can intervene, that can note what happened. And then what we do after that, if it's just tickets, criminal court, and Rikers, that's a failure, and we're going to get back to where we were before. If it's about diversion, deflection, linkage to treatment, linkage to services, now maybe we're getting somewhere.
And just one observation in this conversation is really important, particularly when you're implementing new units. What I cared about most, and we did a lot of these things, with smartphones, with body-worn cameras. I mean, bringing all sorts of, shot spotter, using this technology. We have to make sure that the individuals in the department, the 55,000, not just the cops, but the civilians, understand what we're trying to do, but more importantly, have leaders at the top actually spending time with the people on the street who are going to be engaged in implementing these policies and these practices. And that's, for me, it was always important to know that was the case. We created a new firearms investigation process with a new division and recruited highly performing detectives to be in that unit and changed the whole way, the entire way we manage police investigations on shootings. But going and speaking is nothing like going into the room and saying to people who are going to be out there that you're asking to go out there and do that job, and understanding and reminding them of the pitfalls, particularly the sensitivities around over-policing or, specialized policing or like that. So I think that is also key, and those are things that you wouldn't necessarily, the citizens wouldn't necessarily be aware of, but they do have a right to rely on that process having taken place, not just sending a memo out or putting something out in an order and then letting it drift.
So my hope would be that unit or attached to that unit is a real focus on identifying and analyzing problems. So one of the things that law enforcement is really good at is investigations and knowing what's going on, and that can be completely separate from enforcement actions, right? But knowing what the issue is, and we tend to talk about these things at a very high level, and the policy debates happen at a very high level. The action is granular. So somebody sitting on their stoop blaring a radio is not the same as rampant drug use around safe injection sites, is not the same as 2 illegal weed shops on every block all across the city. I often walk down to the C train at 50th and 8th to get home, and I used to be able to stop at the drugstore there and buy toothpaste. That drugstore's gone. It was shut down by rampant shoplifting. And while all the debate in the city was going on about that, there was no actual understanding of whether that was a phenomenon that was driven by individuals needing daily supplies for their life or by structured, organized retail theft. And until we know what's going on, we cannot have the kind of very particular solutions that we all keep talking about have been so important here. So I would hope that rather than saying, right, we have disorder, we're going to do enforcement, it's we have disorder, what is going on, and how can we address these particular subsets?
One last question. One last question. Okay, I think got one more here. Oh.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer. I'm a U.S. presidential candidate. I'm here representing New York today. I wanted to ask who takes the initiative in an emergency where you are communicating with officials, the NYPD, and the U.S. Army military? Would you be the ones to override things that are needed in the community to protect the civilians? And we see things that are being done by their establishment that are endangering the children and the families, and we see as adults that we need to intervene because the law system's there to state who's in charge. Is it the NYPD that can take that initiative to override community members on a legal matter?
It was here.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben. I just heard parts of it because I'm in the lights. It's hard to hear it. Is it about, the question is about emergency response?
No. It was about emergency response. Is that because I didn't get it all?
Maybe repeat the question.
Yeah, it was.
Hold the mic close.
Yes, I'm Jennifer. I'm a U.S. presidential candidate. I'm here representing New York State. We wanted to ask NYPD, who is it that you consider to take the initiative in times of an emergency, where we're seeing that our military is overriding the rules of requirement of behavior and how we treat our families and children. Is it the NYPD that is to take the initiative to override them assisting on the land? Is it possible to do those things?
Yeah, I don't know. I used to work for the NYPD, so I don't know actually the operational answer to it. Do you know from your time?
The active duty United States military, and I was also a National Guard infantry officer for several years, cannot deploy on U.S. soil, period. They can do things like the National Guard can go work the border during times of emergency or unrest. The National Guard, under the direction not of the federal government, but of the governor. So not the feds, but the governor. Like I was on active duty at Ground Zero after 9/11. I was under the command of the New York State governor. They can do stuff like that, but they can't deploy in our city streets doing anything resembling like law enforcement. I mean, listen, anything could happen in today's world, but that would be patently unconstitutional. But what we do have is the federal government, for example, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, coming in and conducting enforcement. And I think that's an open question. I'm not an elected official. I don't know how New York City will thread that needle. You see in a lot of states, the local government resisting overt cooperation or taking orders from ICE. But then you see in places like Florida, the governor and local municipalities saying, what can we do to support you? You take the lead and we'll follow. I don't know how that's going to work out in New York, but I know a lot of us are curious to see what happens.
Thanks for following up, because we have to wrap it now. They're getting the hook to take us off. So thank you for your time and the questions.